I tried to get a lot of my students from classes to come out here to watch this, but I'm kind of glad they didn't, because the last thing I would want to do after 4 years of working with some of them is demystify the whole thing and them realize I'm not even good at speaking or something like that and that they're all better than me. But the truth is that a lot of the students here are better than I ever was as a public speaker and as a debater. And every single day we work really hard here to train them so that they can have a voice that they can then share with others. And I think that we first should begin by giving another sign of recognition to the 4 student speakers that we had here who, after watching them, I just wish that I'd had them on the debate team also, because they did such a great job. So if you want to give them a round of applause, they did fantastic work. And also Ms. Fry and Coach Cherry, who, like I did, started on the faculty here at Tompkins when we opened just 4 years ago, and have done great work with their students. And I get a lot of their students in my program. And I have to thank them for always preparing them for the things that we talk about and that we debate. Also, getting you to applaud the previous speakers is an old speaker's trick, because no matter how poorly I do, I can say I got an applause while I was speaking. So on that note, we can move on to talking about footprints. I actually competed in speech and debate for 4 years in high school as a student. And over that time, I probably gave close to 500 speeches in a suit and in a tie. So you'll forgive me if today I've decided I have a borderline allergy to getting all locked up in it. But another reason for that is that I spend a lot of time with the kids here, like all the teachers here do, that are really dedicated to their programs and committed to seeing their kids succeed. And I'm here every day after school, usually till about 5 o'clock for our debate practices, and then I spend about 2 to 3 weekends a month with them, about 30 hours over the course of that weekend, watching them compete. And I'm actually hitting a weird transition phase in my life, because this will be my last year here at Tompkins High School. I'm now moving on to another position in Boston, Massachusetts. So I was having a lot of thoughts about this topic tied into footprints and legacies and everything else, reflecting on kind of what I'm leaving behind. And what really stuck out to me over time was it was the kids that are the ones who really create the legacy and the footprints for our debate program. And anything that I've done to guide them along their path, it's their hard work that will be here after I leave and will continue to be here after they leave as well. So really what I want to talk about when I talk about footprints are just 4 kind of bits of wisdom that came up to me as I was thinking about leaving and what that transition phase was going to be like for me. And the first bit of wisdom is that footprints tell stories. And we really have to do everything that we can to not only tell our stories, but to listen to the stories of others. You know, when we look at identities, we have this big thing about fingerprints and footprints. And your fingerprints, they're unique identifiers. No 2 fingerprints are supposedly alike, but they really only tell you about your innate qualities and characteristics, the things that are coded into your genetics. So you can look at me and pretty much tell everything about me like a fingerprint, but it doesn't tell you about who I am and the decisions that I've made and the places that I've been. Our footprints, on the other hand, do tell us those stories. If you look behind you, you can see your origin and where you came from. If you look down at your feet where you stand today, you can see your present. If you look at the direction that your feet are pointing, you can get a good idea about what your future will be like. And more importantly than those 3 things, they tell us about how we got there. Because some of us run from point A to point B. Others of us take a slower path. Some of us have to make abrupt lefts or abrupt rights because we encounter a conflict or a situation that makes us have to change the course that we've been on. And then sometimes we go around in circles and end up doing something completely off the charts and end up right back where we started. But those stories are integral to who we are and about understanding one another. And there's one thing that I learned in debate when you discuss issues about politics and about conflict. It's that so much of the conflict that we see in our world is because we don't have empathy for the stories of others. And we don't care to put ourselves in their shoes, or more importantly, to walk a mile in their shoes to really empathize with their stories and learn about their backgrounds. And that lack of understanding is what creates so much tension and so many rifts between people. So if I had to give a piece of advice related to footprints, the first one would be to really learn about the stories of other people, to care about where they came from, about where they are and where they want to go, and then to share your stories as well. We got to hear the stories of so many speakers today, a unique perspective on the topic of footprints that's shaped by who they are as individuals, by the things that they've done in their lives, by how they were raised and the values that were instilled in them. So we should all be grateful for those opportunities to learn from other people's stories and to share our own as well. The second lesson I've gotten from footprints now that I'm in this transition period is that footprints, like the shoes that make them, can be really difficult to fill. Whenever we set a destination for ourselves, it's very common that we pick role models, people who have walked that path before us, and to show us a way, the safe path to travel in order to get from point A to point B. But sometimes in that pursuit of perfection, the people and the giants that came before us that have done what we want to do, we end up kind of putting ourselves through a lot of anxiety because we can't live up maybe to the same kind of standards that they set. And that makes us feel like a failure maybe, or like we're somehow not doing enough. But the reality is that we are all individuals. And even though we're going on the same path or towards the same destination as somebody else, we shouldn't be worrying about filling their shoes the same way that they did. And there's a few examples of individuals who I've held up as role models throughout my life. The first, her name is Connie Oftenbrink, or we called her Mrs. A. And she was my debate coach when I was in high school. Now, I have to tell you a little bit of a backstory about me. When I first got into high school, I was terrified of public speaking. When I was in junior high, I would do anything within my power to get out of reading in class or speaking in front of the class. I went to the restroom or to the nurse so often that when you combined it with the fact that I was short, thin, and pale, everybody thought I was literally dying. So I get into high school, and like everybody was required to back at that time, I had to take a public speaking class in order to graduate, and they put me in there my freshman year, first semester. Well, that very first day, we did an assignment where we had to take the first letter of our first name, create an adjective that defines us that uses that same letter, and then give a speech about it. Nope. I asked to go to the counselor's office. I went there and demanded that they move me out of that class and into something else. I didn't care that I needed the class to graduate. I knew that I would figure that out later, but I just had to get out of there. So the counselors told me, okay, you'll come in the morning, we'll give you a new schedule, and we'll see if that works out better. All right, I felt pretty successful. So I went home and came back the next day, got my schedule, and found out that the counselors had indeed taken me out of the speech class, which was 1 semester long and would require me to give maybe 6 or 8 speeches. And they had instead put me, as some kind of cruel joke, into debate, which is a 1-year class that would require me to attend 12 competitions and give hundreds of speeches over the course of that 1 year. And I resigned myself basically to defeat, because at that point, they weren't going to change it again. But Mrs. A, who was my debate coach, was an inspiration. She was the epitome of what every teacher ought to be and what every coach ought to be for their students. Mrs. A had competed in speech and debate when she was in high school, but she'd been teaching for over 30 years now. What she had and that she gave us was encouragement and empowerment. She made us all believe inside of her classroom that we had a voice that was worth hearing and that we needed to share with other people. See, I had an interest in current events and politics. I just never had let it manifest in such a way that I was willing to talk about it. So what Mrs. A did one time is she just had me talk to one kid next to me. And then she'd have other kids joining the conversation. And one day I was getting so heated about something, my voice started to elevate. And as you can tell, when I really care about a subject, I get really into it, speaking quickly and just really, really into it. I didn't notice anything else around me. And then I turned around and saw that she'd had the entire class stop what they were doing and watch me as I was speaking. And something just clicked then. You know, it sounds like something you'd see in one of those motivational movies, but it was true. I realized then that I had a voice, and it was about something that I cared about, and that I could share that with other people. And then over 4 years, I competed with Mrs. A, and she gave us all the time in the world. She was a grandmother who gave up 15 to 20 weekends a year to be with the 40 to 50 kids on our debate team traveling the country. And this kid right here was me my senior year. After I'd won 2 state championships, had gone to numerous debate tournaments across the country, because of what she did, turning somebody who was terrified of public speaking into somebody who really did love it and wanted to share that with other people. So then when I became a debate coach now, several years later, I decided that I wanted to use Mrs. A as an example, and I wanted to follow in her footprints. It did not work out. Not only am I not Mrs. A, but I'm just a different person. We have different backgrounds. I tried to be the same level of enthusiastic and give the same amount of energy, but my kids, it just didn't click with them in the same way that it clicked with her and us. My students couldn't look to me and call me Mama A. That wasn't going to happen. So I realized then, after I went through a period of feeling like maybe I'm not cut out for this, maybe I'm not ever going to live up to Mrs. A's lessons and what she did for me, that I then realized that I'm not supposed to be Mrs. A. I'm Mr. Elkins. And instead, I needed to trust my own instincts and the things that I had learned, still taking inspiration from the footprints that she had let be in front of me and apply those to my students. And ultimately, my students started doing a lot better. Now, the other individuals are my parents, who are equally responsible for this picture right here. My parents are Tom and Martha Elkins, and they are both public educators. My dad is now retired, and my mom is still teaching. My first 2 years teaching, I was at Travis High School, which was the same high school that my dad was teaching at. And let me tell you, there were a lot of advantages to having done that. The first was that when I ran out of money for lunch, never had cash on me, I could go knock on his door, and my dad, even though I was now 23 years old, would give me lunch money so that I could eat. But the second was that I got to spend our lunch periods, we had the same period off, sitting with him and talking about things that we had never talked about in the 18 years that I lived at home. And I got to see a whole different dynamic to who my dad was as a person. I'd always known about the compassion that he showed me as his son, and as same with my brothers, but I'd never seen that with the other students. I'd seen him get letters from them, students who are now 30, 40 years old, having their own kids, thanking him for the impact that he had on their life. But I never really got to experience it. And what was so exciting about those first 2 years is I had students walk into my room who also had my dad or had had my dad before. And they would tell me just how incredible of a teacher he was. My dad is what I would define as a master teacher, a person that I aspire to someday be. And I remember how enriching it was to one day have a student come into my classroom who had had my dad, who started his sentence by saying, you know, your dad is an incredible teacher, and I started getting ready for it. He was going to tell me, you're just like him. And he finished his sentence by saying, and you still have a lot to learn. Hey, I always value honesty in my students. And although I felt kind of bad about that at first, I realized that I had no reason to feel ashamed. My dad had spent 40 years as a teacher, dedicating his life to students. And I had to know that in those first 2 years, there was no way I was going to master the arts and complexities of working with students. And the truth is that now, even 7 years after that, I still haven't. And I think what Mrs. Fry and Coach Cherry will tell you, that no matter how long you teach, there's always more that you have to learn. And so I stopped trying to live in my dad's example, being exactly like him, and took the inspiration that he set forth for me so that I could then try to contribute those same gifts to my students as well. Now, the third lesson there is that footprints should be about a journey and not a person. And this is one where we have to put our ego aside. You know, I'm leaving here, and I want to feel like somehow I've made this huge difference and that this debate team and the success that it's had is a part of my work. But while, of course, I played a role in that, it really belongs to the students, and it's really important that all the students understand that it's their ownership for that success. Now, in our world, we have a lot of people throughout all of history that have built huge monuments to themselves, from the pharaohs in Egypt who enslaved thousands of people and made them build these monuments to their life that weren't even finished in a lot of cases until after they died, to tycoons and millionaires and billionaires today who erect large towers and put their name on them so that they too can feel special. But the reality is that we need to live our lives for the journey and not worrying about those footsteps and leaving the deepest footprints behind us. And to get literal for a second, imagine that you're walking in a dirt path, and every step you take, you're pushing down as hard as you can to make sure you're leaving the deepest footprint there, that it will last forever. You're not going to get anywhere very quickly. And at the same time, if your eyes are always on the ground and the footprints that you're leaving behind, you're not going to see or enjoy all the wonderful experiences and people around you. So instead of dedicating ourselves to leaving a legacy and living every moment like that, we should live our lives in a good way with our moral footprint, with a social footprint that's good for the world around us and that will help people. But also, we can't be afraid of making our own footprints. And this is where it gets really, really important. Here at Tompkins High School, our students are very high achievers. I feel very gifted and privileged to have spent the last 4 years here working with students. But for most of you, we have a very narrow definition of what success is. And that sets a singular destination and a singular path to get there. We all know it's true, right? And you can't fault parents for wanting the best for their kids, and you can't fault kids for wanting to succeed. But as you go through your lives today, you have to understand and not be afraid of setting new footprints and choosing distant destinations that are different from that. Because you don't have a lot of opportunities the older that you get to do so and to experience new things. I remember the first job I ever wanted to be was an archaeologist after I watched the trailer for Jurassic Park as a kid. Then I watched Jurassic Park as a kid, and I was terrified of dinosaurs. So the next job that I wanted was to be an astronaut after watching the trailer for Apollo 13. Then I watched Apollo 13 and realized I didn't want to be an astronaut anymore either. And I got a couple lessons for that. One is that probably I make too many life decisions based on movie trailers. And the second, however, was not to fear wanting to do something different and changing our mind. I mean, most people would have whiplash at the idea of changing your career aspirations. And I wish I could say that was a phase I grew out of by the time I got to college, but it wasn't. I went to college and I got my undergraduate degree in political science. And then I decided I wanted to be a chef. So I spent the last summer of my college career working as a chef, trying to change my senior honors thesis to something related to cooking. Until in a few weeks I decided I didn't want to be a chef anymore and decided I wanted to do something in higher education because I was a resident assistant. So I decided to change my senior honors thesis to something related to higher education. And not only was I driving my thesis advisor crazy, but I was making a lot of people like my parents nervous as well about what would end up happening to me in the future. Well, I ended up getting my master's degree in higher education, and then rather than pursuing a career in higher education, I became a teacher. And I coached debate for 2 years at Travis High School. The one thing about coaching debate is there's a lot of skills that people believe are applicable to the field of law. So my students kept telling me, you know what, Mr. Elkins, you really need to go to law school. You know, you shouldn't be settling for this. I never liked that because when people tell me you're settling for being a teacher, I think about my parents who did it for 40 years, and I think that they've got a misconception. But there's 2 words that will haunt you your entire life if you don't do something to prevent facing them, and those 2 words are what if. So now having this idea in my mind that I would go to law school, I did the LSAT, applied to law schools, and enrolled for the next year and gave up teaching after just 2 years. I spent a grand total of 1 year in law school. And it wasn't because it was too hard or I didn't enjoy it, but I really just missed teaching. And I sat down with our dean at the Temple University Law School, who just was really candid with me. You know, these law schools, they see a lot of kids that come in because their parents are lawyers or because they believe that's their next step. You know, every parent wants their kid to take that next step and do something better than they did. And a lot of those kids feel trapped by that decision once they make it. But she had dedicated her life to education as well. She had gotten her law degree, had practiced for a while, and decided that that wasn't for her. And so she gave me the best advice anybody could ever give me. She said, follow the instincts of what's inside of you, and I decided to do that. The whole point of all of this is to not be afraid of having different paths, to not be afraid to try new things. Even if your footprints, when you reach the end of your life and you look back, have you going around in circles, and you end up right back where you started at different points. If you make abrupt lefts or abrupt rights, if you stop from time to time, don't be afraid of doing so, because you'll be better off, and other people would be better off as well. Now, this right here is actually what's on the back of my shirt that I'm wearing today, and this shirt is 4 years in the making. Not just because it literally says 4 years, but because I am terrible when it comes to anything artistic, and I hate things like making shirt designs. And as a coach of a debate team, it was really frustrating to my students for 4 years that we went 3 years never having a t-shirt. But finally this year we had one, and I actually really like this. It says 4 years, dozens of tournaments, hundreds of rounds, thousands of miles, one team. And really, when I now think about the footprint that will be left behind, I hope that that's what I've instilled in the students that are on our debate team. That although they will compete as individuals, they all belong to something that's bigger than just them, and that we are a family. And there's one person now, the last footprint I want to leave, and to conclude this speech, that I want to give some recognition to. When we started our debate team here at Tompkins the first year, we had 24 kids in the Debate 1 class. Only 2 of them stayed in debate throughout all 4 years. And one of them helped organize this event today. His name is Aman Gulrajani. Now, Aman and I have spent something like hundreds and hundreds of hours together over the course of 4 years, and he's graduating this year. And it's hard in a variety of circumstances when you see all the work that somebody's put into something and the commitment that they've had. And you've seen it pay off. They've been successful, but they don't really get the recognition that you feel like they deserve. And I just couldn't leave here without making sure that I had the ability to tell one more person or 50 about what he's done. When Aman came into our team as a freshman, he was desperate to start competing. When other kids wanted to just go watch and kind of get a feel for things, Aman wanted to jump right in. And Aman's qualified for nationals 2 times in the 4 years that he's been in this team. He's won numerous awards. He's done all kinds of things that make us proud. But the biggest thing that Aman has done is he's left bigger footprints that I could ever hope to leave. We are both now leaving here together as he graduates and I leave, and we both came in here at the same time. But I honestly believe that the footprints that Aman created in his 4 years here are the ones that the kids on our team will remember the most, because he taught them what it meant to be a student leader. He taught them what it meant to dedicate themselves to their craft and to face success and failures. And he taught them what it means to be a good person as well and to have integrity. So I just wanted to give him a shout out, I guess, as I leave, as my last footprint, my last kind of gift for all the work that he's done, and hope that he gets the recognition that he deserves as well. Anyway, I hope that somehow throughout my limited amount of time teaching and the limited amount of time that I've had here with you, we can learn some more about footprints, and that you'll take these to let you guide you in the footprints that you make in the future as well. And the big thing is just to not be afraid to forge your own path, and to not be afraid to go back when necessary, but to always keep your eyes forward and not just worried about the past. Thank you.
Mr. Elkins, could you stay on stage for a minute? Could you stay on stage for a minute?